It was just a simple portrait of two young women, but look more closely at what they're doing with their hands. Dr. Rachel Bennett had spent 9 years as curator of Victorian photography at the Seattle Historical Museum, examining thousands of images from the Pacific Northwest's early years. But on a rainy October afternoon, she discovered a photograph that would challenge everything historians thought they knew about women's relationships in the 1890s. The photograph arrived in a collection donated by the Morrison family estate in Capitol Hill. Inside a cedar box were dozens of cabinet cards and tintypes documenting Seattle's pioneer families. Most showed typical scenes: wedding portraits, family gatherings, children in Sunday clothes. But one photograph made Rachel stop and look twice. Two young women sat close together on a carved wooden bench, a painted garden backdrop behind them. Both appeared to be in their early 20s. The woman on the left had dark hair styled in the Gibson girl fashion popular in the mid-1890s, her face showing delicate features and an expression of quiet contentment. The woman on the right had lighter hair, a stronger jaw, and eyes that looked directly at the camera with remarkable intensity. They wore matching dark Victorian dresses with high lace collars and cameo brooches. Their shoulders touched. Their faces were turned slightly toward each other rather than fully facing the camera, as was typical for formal portraits of the era. But what caught Rachel's attention wasn't the intimate positioning or the matching clothing. It was their hands. Both women had their hands resting in their laps, visible in the photograph. At first glance, the positioning looked natural, casual. But Rachel had examined enough Victorian portraits to know that nothing in a formal photograph was casual. Every element was planned, posed, deliberate. The woman on the left had her right hand positioned palm down on her lap, but her fingers weren't simply resting, they were arranged in a specific pattern. Her thumb and index finger formed a circle, while her other 3 fingers extended straight. The woman on the right had both hands visible. Her left hand rested palm up on her lap, fingers slightly curled. Her right hand was positioned over it, fingers interlaced with the left in a complex pattern that would have required conscious effort to maintain during the long exposure. But it was the touching that Rachel noticed most. Where the two women sat close together, their left hands met in the narrow space between them. Their pinky fingers were linked together, barely visible in the photograph but unmistakably connected. Rachel had seen Victorian hand signals before: the language of fans, the positioning of gloves, the subtle codes that women used to communicate. But this was different. This was more intimate, more deliberate, more personal. She photographed the image with her high-resolution camera, uploading it to her computer. On screen, magnified until the hands filled her monitor, the details became unmistakable. The linked pinkies. The circular finger pattern. The interlaced hands. Each positioning held with obvious intention. In the bottom corner of the cabinet card, embossed in fading silver, were the words, "Larson Photography, Seattle, Washington Territory, 1895. Rachel couldn't shake the image from her mind. That evening, she returned to her apartment in Fremont and spread research materials across her dining table. She had photographed the entire Morrison collection, and now she scrolled through the digital files looking for context. The collection contained 52 photographs spanning from 1890 to 1920. The two women from the mysterious portrait appeared in 7 other images together, always close, always touching in some way, always with those same deliberate hand positions. In one photograph from 1896, they stood in a garden, their hands clasped between them, fingers interlaced in the same complex pattern. In another from 1897, they sat at a piano, their hands positioned on the keys with that same circular finger gesture visible. In a third from 1899, they stood on a porch, their linked pinkies barely visible in the folds of their skirts. 8 photographs across 4 years. Always together. Always touching. Always with hands positioned in ways that suggested coded meaning. Rachel opened her database of LGBTQ+ history and Victorian-era same-sex relationships. In the 1890s, romantic friendships between women were common and socially accepted, to a point. Women were expected to have close female companions, to write passionate letters, even to share beds. But there was a line. Sexual relationships between women were unspoken, unacknowledged, denied. Women who loved other women had to hide in plain sight, using codes and signals that allowed them to recognize each other while appearing innocent to those who didn't know how to read the signs. Her phone buzzed. Her colleague, Dr. Marcus Kim, a specialist in LGBTQ+ history at the University of Washington, responded to her text. Free tomorrow morning. What did you find? Rachel typed back, 2 women who might have been documenting their relationship through hand signals. Bring your sources on romantic friendships and Boston marriages. Marcus arrived at the museum at 9 sharp, carrying a messenger bag filled with research materials. Rachel had the portrait projected on the wall of her research room. The 2 women gazed down at them with quiet dignity and unmistakable intimacy. Look at their hands, Rachel said, pointing with a laser pointer. The linked pinkies. The circular pattern. The interlaced fingers. This isn't random Victorian posing. Marcus approached the projection, studying the image intently. He was silent for a long moment, then he set down his bag and pulled out a thick folder. In the 1890s, women who loved women faced impossible circumstances, Marcus began. Society accepted passionate friendships but condemned anything sexual or romantic. So women developed ways to signal their relationships to each other while maintaining plausible deniability to the outside world. He spread documents across the table. Academic papers on Boston marriages, lifelong partnerships between women that were publicly acceptable as long as they weren't acknowledged as romantic. Letters between women using coded language. Diaries describing relationships that were clearly more than friendship but never explicitly stated as such. Hand signals were particularly useful, Marcus continued. They could be photographed, creating a permanent record, but they looked innocent enough that people who didn't know the code would see nothing unusual. Just 2 friends holding hands or sitting close together. Rachel pulled up an academic article about Victorian sapphic codes. The article described several documented hand signals used by women who loved women in the 1880s and 1890s. Linked pinkies represented an unbreakable bond. A circle formed by thumb and index finger symbolized eternal commitment. Interlaced fingers in a specific pattern indicated a romantic rather than platonic relationship. These women were documenting their relationship, Rachel said quietly. Creating evidence that they were together, that their bond was real, even if they could never speak it aloud. The embossed studio name led Rachel to research Larson photography. The studio had operated in Seattle from 1892 to 1904, run by a photographer named Emma Larson. Emma Larson herself had never married, living instead with another woman named Catherine Wells for over 30 years. In the archives of the Seattle Public Library, Rachel found a brief biography of Emma Larson written in 1935, shortly after her death. The biography mentioned her photography business and her lifelong companion, Catherine Wells, describing their relationship in the euphemistic language typical of the era. But it was a letter tucked into Emma Larson's business records that revealed the truth. Written in 1896 to a fellow photographer in San Francisco, Larson wrote, "I have developed a specialty in documenting the bonds between women who understand each other as I understand my dear Catherine. They come to my studio seeking portraits that show their truth without declaring it. I help them create images that they can keep, that prove their love existed, even if the world will not acknowledge it." Rachel's hands trembled as she read. Emma Larson had deliberately created a safe space for women who loved women, helping them document their relationships through coded hand signals that would look innocent to most viewers but would carry deep meaning for the women themselves and for others who knew how to read the signs. Marcus found more photographs in the Larson photography collection. 12 other portraits showed pairs of women with similar hand positioning, linked pinkies, circular finger gestures, interlaced hands. In each case, the women sat closer than typical friends, their body language suggesting intimacy that went beyond Victorian romantic friendship. She was creating an archive, Marcus said. A hidden archive of sapphic relationships in 1890s Seattle. Women who couldn't be open about their love could come to Larson's studio and create photographs that documented their truth. With the pattern identified, Rachel became obsessed with finding the identity of the two women in the original portrait. The Morrison family had donated the collection, and donor records provided contact information for David Morrison, age 72, who had inherited the photographs from his grandmother. Rachel called David that evening. He had a warm, gentle voice and was immediately intrigued by her research. "Those photographs came from my great-aunt's estate," David explained. Her name was Margaret Morrison. She never married, lived her whole life with her friend Alice Winters. They had a house together in Capitol Hill for over 50 years. "Can you tell me about them?" Rachel asked, her heart racing. "They were wonderful," David said. "I remember visiting them when I was young, in the 1960s. Two elderly ladies who clearly adored each other. They had this way of finishing each other's sentences, of touching each other constantly, a hand on a shoulder, fingers brushing together. My parents called them spinster ladies, old maids who never found husbands. But even as a child, I could see it was more than that." "Did they ever talk about their relationship?" Rachel asked gently. David was quiet for a moment. "Not directly. But Aunt Margaret gave me a book once, when I was about 14. It was a collection of Emily Dickinson's poetry, and she had marked certain poems, the ones about love between women. She told me, some people love differently than others expect, but love is love regardless. I think she was trying to tell me something, in the only way she felt safe to do so." With David's permission, Rachel began researching Margaret Morrison and Alice Winters. City directories showed them living at the same address from 1896 until Margaret's death in 1968. Census records listed them as companions living together. Property records showed they had jointly purchased their house in 1902. In the archives of the University of Washington, Rachel found that both women had attended the university in the early 1890s, which was remarkable for women at that time. Margaret had studied literature. Alice had studied music. They had met in 1893 and, according to university records, had been inseparable throughout their time as students. But it was Margaret's personal diary, discovered in the Morrison family papers, that confirmed everything. The diary covered the years 1894 to 1897 and contained entries that were clearly written in code, proper Victorian language that nonetheless conveyed deep romantic love. One entry, dated September 1895, just months after the photograph was taken, was particularly revealing. "Today Alice and I had our portrait made at Miss Larson's studio. We wore our matching dresses, the ones we made together last winter. Miss Larson understood without our saying anything, she always does. She positioned us close, our shoulders touching, our hands able to make our secret signs. When I linked my smallest finger with Alice's, when we formed our symbols, I felt such joy. This photograph will be proof that we existed, that our love was real, even if we can never speak it plainly. When I look at this image years from now, I will remember this day, this moment when we were brave enough to document our truth." 6 months after discovering the photograph, Rachel organized an exhibition at the Seattle Historical Museum titled, Hidden in Plain Sight, Sapphic Love in Victorian Seattle. She displayed the photograph of Margaret and Alice alongside the other portraits from Emma Larson's studio, each showing women documenting their relationships through coded hand signals. The exhibition attracted immediate attention. Local media covered it extensively. The Seattle Times ran a feature article. National LGBTQ+ publications followed. But the most powerful response came from the queer community in Seattle. David Morrison attended the opening, bringing his daughter and grandson, 3 generations standing before the portrait of Margaret and Alice, seeing their relationship finally acknowledged and honored. "My whole life, I was told they were just friends," David said, tears in his eyes. "Old maid spinsters who never found love. But they had found love. They had each other. And this photograph proves it. Their fingers prove it. The way they're touching, the way they're looking at each other, it was always there, visible to anyone who knew how to see it. Other descendants came forward with similar stories. Women whose great-grandmothers had lived with lifelong companions, or dear friends, who were clearly more than that. Families who had photos of pairs of women sitting close, touching, their hands positioned in those same coded gestures. Marcus worked with genealogists to trace the other couples in Emma Larson's photographs. They identified 8 of the 12 pairs, teachers who lived together, business partners who shared homes, women who had built lives together in an era when their love had no name, no legal recognition, no social acceptance. One of Emma Larson's own photographs surfaced, a portrait of Emma and Catherine Wells taken in 1900, sitting close together, their hands interlaced in the same pattern as Margaret and Alice. Emma had photographed her own relationship using the same code she had helped other women use. Patricia Chen, a queer historian from Portland, traveled to Seattle to study the collection. She brought examples from other regions, photographs from San Francisco, Boston, New York, all showing similar hand signals between women who loved women. This was a widespread practice, Patricia explained. Women who couldn't be open about their relationships found photographers who understood, who would help them create these coded documents. The hand signals varied by region and time period, but the purpose was always the same, to create proof that their love existed. A year after discovering the photograph, Rachel stood in the museum's conservation lab, carefully handling the original cabinet card of Margaret and Alice. They had digitally preserved all the photographs from Emma Larson's studio, creating an online archive accessible to researchers and descendants. But she kept returning to that first image. Margaret and Alice, sitting close together, their linked pinkies barely visible, their interlaced fingers forming patterns that declared their love to anyone who knew how to read them. David Morrison had donated Margaret's diary to the museum, and Rachel had spent hours reading through it. The entries were written in careful Victorian language, but the love was unmistakable. Margaret wrote about Alice's laugh, her intelligence, her kindness. She described their life together, the house they shared, the garden they tended, the quiet evenings reading together. In one of the final entries, written in 1897, Margaret reflected on their relationship. "We cannot marry. The law forbids it. Society condemns it. Even speaking of it is dangerous. But Alice and I have created our own marriage, our own commitment, our own life together. The photograph from Miss Larson's studio is our wedding portrait, even if no one else knows it. Our linked fingers are our wedding rings. Our interlaced hands are our vows. The world may never acknowledge what we are to each other, but we know. And that photograph proves it, preserves it, protects it from being forgotten." The Seattle Times ran a follow-up article featuring interviews with elderly queer women who had lived through similar circumstances in the mid-20th century, women who had been told their love didn't exist, who had hidden in plain sight, who had created their own signals and codes to recognize each other. One woman, 89-year-old Dorothy Chen, said she had grown up hearing stories about her grandmother and her grandmother's friend, who had lived together for 40 years. "I always knew they were more than friends," Dorothy said. "The way they touched each other, looked at each other. But no one ever said it out loud." Seeing these photographs, seeing the finger codes, finally understanding that there was a whole system for women to document their love, it makes me realize my grandmother wasn't alone. There was a community, a hidden community, and they found ways to preserve their truth. Rachel's exhibition traveled to other museums, San Francisco, New York, Chicago. At each location, descendants came forward with photographs of their own, pictures of women sitting close together, hands positioned in meaningful ways, love documented in code. The photograph of Margaret and Alice became iconic, reproduced in textbooks about LGBTQ+ history, featured in documentaries about queer life before Stonewall. Always with the same message: look closely at their hands, see what was hidden, recognize the love that was documented in code because it couldn't be spoken aloud. Margaret Morrison had lived until 1968, just 1 year before the Stonewall riots that would launch the modern LGBTQ+ rights movement. She had spent 73 years with Alice Winters, their relationship unacknowledged and unnamed, but real and enduring nonetheless. Alice had died in 1965, and Margaret's diary entry from that day was heartbreaking. My dear companion of 72 years is gone. The world called her my friend. I called her my everything. We had no legal rights, no social recognition, no words to describe what we were to each other. But we had love. We had our life together. And we have that photograph from 1895, our linked fingers forever preserved, proof that we existed, that our love was real. In the end, the simplest gestures could carry the deepest meaning. Two young women, sitting in a photographer's studio in 1895, linking their pinky fingers together while interlacing their other hands in coded patterns. A small act. A deliberate choice. A declaration of love that would echo across 130 years. Sometimes you just needed to look closely enough at their fingers to see the truth they couldn't speak aloud.